Ladies, gentlemen, and all you lovely mutants of Mars, welcome. As always, I am Cosmic, and today we're going to be reviewing the Technomancer, the new third-person RPG developed by Spiders and published by Focus Home Interactive. Spiders, of course, is best known for Of Orcs and Men and Bound by Flame. Spiders games have always received a mixed reception. They often make charming but flawed games, in both technical and narrative departments. Bound by Flame, for example, was a charming game but certainly had problems and odd design choices across the board. I for one personally have always been a fan of the games that Spiders produce and was certainly hoping for a big step up from them in terms of the Technomancer. But did that actually happen? Well, let's find out. Now, I am giving away a copy of the game, so stay tuned to the end of the review to find out how to win that copy. The setting of the game is in the same universe as Spider's previous game, Mars Warlogs, and players of that game will instantly recognise the familiarities. Set on Mars some 200 years after the initial colonisation of the planet, humankind is divided into water corporations who wage war over the single most valuable resource on the planet, water. Living in large colony domes, humankind struggles to survive with the rich and powerful elite in control of basically everything. Mutated humans have been enslaved and are forced to carry out maintenance work for all the humans, and all the while corporations are waging war on each other, utilising a secret group of highly trained soldiers, Technomancers. Now, Technomancers are a reclusive group of powerful warriors who harness the power of electricity from their own bodies, using implants and specially designed armour. In the game, you will start off as a rookie Technomancer, Zachariah, who is about to become an officer in the Abundance Corporation's army. There's no option for a female version, but there is a decent selection of customization options for your male version of Zachariah. Events unfold that place you in the centre of critical events for the entire planet and the future of Technomancers themselves. Now, I don't want to talk too much about the story and spoil it. The overall story of the game is fairly good, and it does have an interesting plot with a unique take on a futuristic Martian setting. The main problem lies in the writing and the voice acting. First, the voice acting goes from strong with characters like Phobos sounding really authentic, to others like the protagonist himself sounding outright odd at places, and just the actual moment and the event and the actual voice dialogue just do not match up at certain times. The writing is ultimately the major problem with the story as it is set out currently. Some lines don't make sense given the conversation, others come off rushed and ill thought out. Narratively, however, the biggest issue comes in the form of the storyboard itself. The game does not do a good job of introducing any of its main characters, particularly the companions and major villains. In fact, one major villain only meets the protagonist maybe 3-4 times for around 20 seconds apiece, yet you're supposed to believe that this is the game's major nemesis, and this villain has it out for you for some reason. Yeah, right, because that's a thing, because we've met 3 times for 20 seconds. It doesn't really add up that way, and they don't really do a good job of character building. There also seems to be a significant lack of world building in the game's story, coupled with a severe lack of overall story cutscenes. Quests can just end with no real resolution. Instead, you're just given a task to go somewhere else by the quest log, without a real explanation or logical reason as to why. The story, while interesting, is completely full of plot holes and narrative connectivity issues. There seems to be a lack of dialogue for the most part, which ends up making the first half of the game feel disjointed. In particular, the first hour can be particularly frustrating with a total lack of world and character building. What the story lacks, it does make up for in an interesting world with a nice sci-fi dystopian theme. The overarching story is a good one, it just suffers through and through from overall execution problems. Suffering from overall execution is a statement that can be readily applied to other parts of the Technomancer as well. Graphically, the game isn't too bad with only a few minor bugs and glitches here and there, though it doesn't look AAA, it just does the job okay. Facial animations are very disappointing, and character animations overall can be somewhat odd at times. The landscapes of the game look good, but there's just a lack of them in total, and the overall graphical fidelity of the game lacks a high-end polish that I had really hoped for, especially considering the game's promotional material, which I have to say, Spiders is very good at producing great-looking promotional material that rarely reflects the actual game. For example, the launch trailer. A lot of those cutscenes in the launch trailer aren't actually in the game, which makes no sense whatsoever. The musical score of the game does make up for the graphical problems. The composer Olivier Devrier has once again done wonders with everything from subtle ambient tones to dramatic battle sequences, and it is a great soundtrack to go along to. Now let's get down to the nitty-gritty of the game mechanics, starting with something that you're going to be doing a hell of a lot of, which is combat. The combat in the Technomancer works exactly the same to that of Bound by Flame, with a few minor improvements. And as you will remember, those who played Bound by Flame, a lot of people had major complaints about the combat design in that game. There are 3 battle stances which determine the weapon your Technomancer uses, such as the warrior stance, which uses a 2-handed staff, or the rogue stance, which uses a dagger and a handgun. Each stance has advantages and disadvantages with its own set of attacks and defences. Personally, I preferred using the high damage staff and then switching to the guardian stance for their defensive shield and mace. I don't mind that the actual different stances, and different stances work against different opponents in various ways. The problems lie in the fact that the basic attacks for each of the stances don't have a great variety of animations or attacks. You just have a set couple of attacks and animations, and that's basically it. It feels somewhat shallow in that regard. There's a nice fluidity and pace to the combat, however the controls can also be problematic in some respects, in particular when it comes to the direction of your character, especially when you're trying to dodge. The dodge direction can just sometimes do what it wants to do instead of doing what you're telling it to do. Spiders have improved the overall combat design, and each stance compared to that of Bound by Flame does have a different playstyle. There are some problems with each, but they are minor, and compared to Bound by Flame, there have been some, I would say minor improvements, because the overall combat design remains the same. The biggest letdown for combat, I would think, is the actual enemy variety itself. What they have done is created this really interesting dystopian Martian universe and then filled it with human enemies, rather than what you should have is the various mutated beasts. And you do get to see a couple of varieties of mutants, and all different, like a mutated gorilla that has tentacles for face and stuff like that can poison you. And battling those enemies is a lot of fun, but there's just not enough of them. You actually spend the majority of time fighting soldiers with electric resistant uniforms, which makes your Technomancy attacks basically pointless, which is very, very frustrating. The AI too is somewhat of a letdown, and ultimately, while some challenges are pretty good in terms of a challenge and difficulty, a lot of them just require a very simple technique to get past, and most of the time I ended up using the 2-handed staff just to area attack everything until it died. Speaking of Technomancy, it is probably one of the things that is most fun about combat is using the different Technomancy spells, such as the Electricity Storm, which is a massive AoE that produces high damage to a wide variety of enemies, and that is a lot of fun to use. The problem with the Technomancy is that while it is a lot of fun to invest in, and you can invest in it in various ways, it ultimately towards the end game becomes very, very underpowered, because a lot of the enemies end up using electricity resistant armor, which then completely negates the majority of your Technomancy spells, especially if you have chosen to specialize in Technomancy rather than specializing in one of the battle stances. You can end up with a severely underpowered character. Now, after combat comes the character progression. Now, the character progression is something that I really did like about this game. There's a wide variety of character progression available. Not only do you have the 4 skill trees in which they're for battle, including the 3 battle stances and, of course, Technomancy that you can invest in, but there are also skills such as crafting, exploration, science, which will also give you dialogue options and be able to complete certain quests in different ways depending on how much you invest into those things. On top of this, you also have statistical progression in the form of 4 skill trees that essentially provide strength, agility, endurance, that kind of thing, which basically gives you a buff to something. So for strength, it will give you more damage for your hand-to-hand attacks, and you'll be able to wear higher level strength armor, or endurance will give you health points, or power will increase the potency of your Technomancy abilities. And so for overall, I think the character progression is nicely spaced out. There's a lot of variety in there. You can specialize whichever way you want. By the end of the game, I reached around level 36, 37, and by that time I'd basically completed 2 battle trees and pretty much put most of the skill points in the other trees what I wanted to do. So there's plenty of skill points available for you to basically dual specialize into something. Lastly, in terms of game mechanics, I wanted to talk about crafting. Now, crafting was very, very big, and it was heavily pushed in Bound by Flame because there was so much you could change in each individual piece of armor, such as, the elbows, the spolders, the back panels, everything like that. Crafting was one of the biggest points and good points at that of Bound by Flame, and it was heavily pushed. And sadly, in the Technomancer, it seems to be a bit of a downgrade from Bound by Flame. There is a severe lack of items overall to actually customize, and those that you can customize, you can basically only customize up to 3 times. So there's 3 different slots. So for a chest piece, you can only customize arm guards, spolders, and a backplate. And there's just not that much progression in terms of the crafting. It feels very shallow. It isn't as good as Bound by Flame's crafting by a long way. And to be honest, it has less impact. It's far, far less impactful compared to that of Bound by Flame. You can actually probably go through this game without having to craft a single thing, and you'll just get by just fine. Like I mentioned, the lack of items is a big issue entwined with the crafting, and that in itself is a big disappointment. I was hoping to see a wide variety of items and armors available, stuff, like Mad Max and all that kind of thing, because of the dystopian Martian setting with all the, the deserts and stuff like that, and it's just not there, and it's really disappointing in that regard that you probably, especially I went the Technomancer route, and specifically sticking to Technomancer armor that improved my fluid availability and regeneration, and ultimately I probably only changed my armor maybe 4 times for the entirety of the game, which, needless to say, is very, very disappointing for this type of RPG. I think in conclusion for the Technomancer, it has been a very, very mediocre outing once again from Spiders. I really hoped that they would take it up a gear in this regard, come out with something that was really polished, that looked really good, didn't have to be particularly long, it just had to play and be really good, and that is not the case. It is essentially Bound by Flame in a sci-fi universe, and they have made minor improvements, but they haven't made major leaps forward, which was what I was ultimately hoping for, and I think a lot of people deserve in that regard, especially loyal players of Spiders games. The story choices and the choice and consequence and multiple endings is good. It's not as impactful as I would have hoped, but there is a lot of different things, so there's a little bit of replayability in that regard. I actually completed the game first time round in 21 hours, and I think I only missed 1 side quest in that thing, so it's not a huge, 100-hour Witcher 3 game. You're going to take around 20 hours, give or take, to basically get the majority of things done. Do I recommend it personally? I have to say that if you've played Bound by Flame and enjoyed Bound by Flame, then the Technomancer, you'll probably enjoy that too, regardless of its issues. I think if you're looking for something more high-end and you're looking for something that doesn't have as many problems, so if you're looking for something that plays like The Witcher 3 or Dragon Age, something like that, you're not going to find it in the Technomancer. I personally like the charm that the game has in terms of its overarching story, its setting, and some of the characters are really cool, like Phobos, the mutant leader, the crazy doctor, who sadly is again, has a problem with the introduction to Scott Seeker, because he's a basically mad scientist who does come up with really funny stuff sometimes, but they just did not do a good job of introducing that character and why he's like he is. And the whole world building and character building was a problem from the get-go. For me, I think if you're on the fence about this, I would wait and see and pick it up in a sale. Flat out. I mean, it is a $40 game, but I think that with the problems that are in the current build of the game and the core design problems that are in the game, I think that you should wait for a sale to pick this up. And that is my review of the Technomancer. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Do like, subscribe, and leave a comment. If you want to win a free copy of the game, there's a link in the description below to enter, and I will see you next time.